have
Oh,
us backwards.
Stansbury. They do have us backwards.
They have us backwards.
Oops. Backwards.
I'm going to be Wexton.
All right, well, other than us being totally confused on where we're standing, so nice to see you all. So I'm Sean Casten from the 6th District in Illinois. Really happy to be here. You're too kind. So I've done 2 trips to Israel since being elected in 2018. The second one was with J Street. And I guess what I'd share with you is that I'm a proud progressive. I'm a New Dem, I'm a centrist guy, but I'm a proud progressive in the sense that I don't know how society moves forward unless we commit ourselves to acknowledging both the beauty of what we've done and what we need to do going forward. What do we promise as a country, and who are we actually? And there's no inconsistency with that, but what I love about J Street and the trips that I've done is there's a love of Israel that is based both on who it is and who it promises to be. And you don't get that in other trip that I've had in the region. And society doesn't move forward unless people do that, and it is always hard to do that. There are always voices. It is always easier to support the status quo than to actually support progressive change. So I thank you for doing it. It's been really a privilege to learn with all of you.
Hello, I'm Madeline Dean from suburban Philadelphia, the PA4. Pennsylvania is in the house. It's really an honor. Hello, how are you? It's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you for including us. Like Sean, I had the chance to go to Israel for the second time with J Street, and what an honor it was. Both trips, of course, were an extraordinary place of learning. A place of learning, as I've told so many of my friends, about my own faith. I'm a Catholic by practice, practicing, we're trying to get it right, but also about so many different faiths. And so while as a freshman I went on the APAC trip, I knew I wanted to go on J Street's trip to make sure I got a fuller perspective of what is life in Israel. What are the struggles? What are the extraordinary beauties and opportunities, the rich history that is there? And so for me, it was a life-changing event to go on the J Street trip. To understand better the deep richness of the Israeli experience, but certainly to understand the injustices and the struggles of the Palestinian life. I guess also I look to you for ideas on how Congress can be a further help to make sure that the nearly 2 million people who do not enjoy full freedoms will get to that place of a 2-state solution. I know we'll have a fuller conversation about that, but certainly I'm very, very worried about the events in Israel with the reorganization of the new prime minister. As I worry about what's going on in our own country. So in any event, thank you, J Street. So lucky to be with you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Wexton. I represent Virginia's 10th District in the United States House of Representatives. So this was my very first trip to Israel, and I knew that it was also my first CODEL abroad. I was very, very glad to go with J Street. I knew I wanted to go with them because I knew that it would be a very balanced view of the situation in Israel. And I went not just because I wanted to learn about the culture and the history and, of course, eat some of the delicious food, which is pretty amazing. I don't know how they get cucumbers and tomatoes to taste so fresh over there. But I knew that I wanted to learn more about the plight of the Palestinians and what the day-to-day life was for them, as well as the day-to-day life of a regular Israeli citizen. And that's exactly what I got with the J Street trip. We met with everybody from prime ministers down to regular folks on the street. It was absolutely amazing. It changed my life, and I will never look at the situation there the same. It's changed the way I look at things now, the way I approach policy and everything. So I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to go.
All right, well, I'm going to round things up here from the West. I am Melanie Stansbury, and I am proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. And I am so honored honored to be able to stand here today with my incredible colleagues and of course all of you who are partners in peace in advocating for our friends in the Middle East, in Palestine, in Israel, and to ensure that we bring peace and help to facilitate peace in this region. I had the incredible honor of joining J Street last November on a trip to the region. It was my second time visiting. I grew up in a partially Jewish family, and my family always had ties to Israel. It was a prominent part of our life, and always had a love and passion and interest in the region, in its politics, and in the cultures and history of the area. But I have to say that this trip was deeply impactful on my life. It changed my perspective on many of the issues that I had thought about and cared about for many years, and of course gave me a renewed sense of urgency for the work that we have to do ahead here in the United States, and particularly as members of Congress and allies who have not only a strategic interest in the region, but also a humanitarian interest in the Palestinian and Israeli people and their future. So I want to say thank you to J Street for the opportunity to be able to travel with you, but also I want to take a moment, since it is December and we have just come out of an election. I want to thank all of you who supported pro-peace candidates across the United States, because we won!
So we were asked to talk about some highlights from the trip, and I want to be a little bit metaphysical if I can, because there are specific highlights in the places you go, but what I was really struck by in this last trip is that we talk a lot, as we should, about our unbreakable bond with Israel, and we talk about that in the context of the Shoah. We talk about that, not those of us on the stage, some of us in the context of the rapture. But what struck me on this trip is how much, that joke went on a little too long. What struck me on this trip is how much of the reason that we connect so closely with Israel, nation to nation, is because we have so much commonality in our histories. We both have some awkward history with the British colonial era, which gave us some weird history with the British, but gave us constitutional democracies based on the rule of law. We both have some awkward relationships with the people who were here at the time of that separation from the British colonial era. We are both nations of immigrants, and as nations of immigrants, our coherent story is based on something that is a little bit myth and a little bit truth. And so we understand each other in ways that others don't, and I think we understand through that lens. I highly recommend, I just finished Clint Smith's book, How the Word is Passed. And he has this beautiful line in it where he says there's history and nostalgia, and in between is memory. And our challenge as legislators, as citizens, as human beings, is to figure out how to make sure that memory is as close as possible to history. You cannot understand the history of the United States if you assume it started in 1491 from virgin undeveloped land. You can't understand where we are right now in the United States if you don't understand that for 300 years we depended on free labor. And in the same way, when you get to Israel and you travel, you can't understand the region if you don't go to Hebron. You cannot understand Hebron if you only know it as the Cave of the Patriarchs, if you only know Hebron as the site of the 1929 massacre, if you only know Hebron as a horrific monument to Baruch Goldstein, or if you only know Hebron as the current militarized ghost town that it's become. The history, the myth, the nostalgia is all tied up in all of those things. And in the same way in America, we need our myths. We need something to unify us together. The Israelis also need their myths, but we need to make sure that myth is as close to history as we can. And respect the nostalgia, but be close to it. And that was the opportunity that really stuck with me.
I think I'll go a little more grandmotherly. I kept thinking of my trip in terms of the children that I saw. The Palestinian children, the Israeli children, the other immigrant children running around knowing joy, knowing one another when they had that chance to know one another. And I keep thinking of how we in America want, I think, the same thing that we want for Israel, which is peace and a place of acceptance and of understanding, a reduction of bigotry and anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ, and I kept thinking of the children. It's up to us, the adults, because all of those negative things are learned. I look at my own grandchildren. They don't have any built-in bigotry. They don't have any prejudice toward color or difference or nationality, language. They just see the humanity. They see the fun in the other kid, sometimes the challenge. But that's what I saw when we were in Israel. And sadly, we had a chance to visit with a school, and we were going to go into the school of Palestinian children, but we couldn't because the night before, a graduate of that same elementary school had been killed. A child had been killed. And so we couldn't go there because they were struggling with that violence. We did go to Hebron. I'll never forget Hebron. To your point, you can't describe it to somebody and actually do it justice. It is ghostly. It's ghastly. What I have been told was once a thriving city of merchants and exchange and commerce. Now a city where the streets are segregated, where Palestinians can't walk, where their apartment buildings are caged fronts with locked doors, only able to exit by way of the rear. And we saw some children behind those caged balconies. It makes no sense. It went against every fiber of my being as an American, as a Democrat, as somebody who says we have to struggle for greater equality here. And certainly that is what I hope for in Israel. The other place of great memory for me is when we visited with a farmer and his family. And they sadly showed us up on this very challenging farm, lots of rocks and some pastures, that their cattle, their goats were run off the farm by settlers. They showed us videos of settler violence. And so for me, for an American, for a Democrat who wants equality for all, for the beautiful Israeli people and the beautiful Palestinian people, those two visits with families, some at a distance, and some we could be up close with and see their children as they sold us little bracelets. We have to be a part of peace. And my final thing on this is, to a person, they said that the United States is the indispensable nation. And I say that not with a haughtiness, but with a humility. We have an important role to play. J Street gets that. We have an important role to play in moving forward toward peace.
I will start by associating myself with the remarks of my colleagues, as we do in Congress. But I would add a couple things. You know, for me, it was really just so striking, all the groups of people that we met with and all the people that we met with. You know, one of the things that moved me so much was when we went to Gaza, and we were not able to go into Gaza, but we were at a kibbutz just outside of Gaza. And I was really struck by the collective PTSD that whole country experiences. Such a young country, and it has never really known true peace. And one of the things that really struck me there is that they said that the kids in the little daycare there, and these are preschoolers, they're toddlers, they can't even really walk. And they said that when they heard the air raid sirens go off for all the rockets coming, they would just be trained and they would just put their arms up in the air. The reason they would do that is because somebody would come and scoop them up and take them to shelter. And that was a whole generation of children who were raised that way, and that was the only world that they knew. And I know that we can do so much better for them. When we went to Hebron, it was also very tragic because doors weren't just locked, they were actually welded shut. Mm-hmm. You know, it was just very frightening to see. And while we were there, a man came up in his truck, and he was kind of the Israeli version of a MAGA, right? So he had a big Israeli flag in the back of his truck, a couple of them. He came up and started taunting us, yelling at us in various ways, and just really giving us a hard time. And we just, you know, we diffused the situation and talked with the guy. But it did not really bode well for the prospects of the kind of peace that we need. That's why we need to lead, and we need to make sure that we bring back the prospects of a two-state solution. Another thing that I saw is it's not just the Palestinians who suffer this trauma, and the Israelis as well. You know, we talked to some IDF soldiers who had since left the service, who were very traumatized by the way that they had to treat the settlers and the way they had to treat, not the settlers, but the Palestinians and the way that they had to quell violence, or what they considered violence. It was really scary stuff, and they are suffering from a lot of PTSD as well. So we need to make sure that we do everything we can to push for this two-state solution. It's very, very important, and it's slipping further and further away every day. One of the things that we saw there were these superhighways that have been built across Israel, and they're bisecting the Palestinian territories, making it impossible for them to be united. And this is by design, and so we've got to do more to make sure that we make it clear that the two-state solution is absolutely necessary. Because I'm not giving up. It's far too important I do believe very strongly, I think many of you do as well, that the only way that we're going to get to lasting peace is with a two-state solution. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, this was my second trip to Israel and the West Bank. I went 22 years ago when I was in my 20s and traveling around Europe and the Middle East as a young person, staying in backpackers, hostels, and traveling to the Holy Land to experience these landscapes for myself. And I have to say that this trip with J Street was deeply transformational for me, not only in my understanding of the region, but also to see the ways in which both Israel as a nation and the West Bank and Palestine have been transformed over the last 2 decades of conflict. There are 2 things I want to share with you about that transformation, which I saw and felt on the ground. The first is the physical transformation of the space. As a young person traveling across those ancient, sacred, beautiful landscapes, I traveled all across the region, across the West Bank. I went up to the Golan, down to the Negev, went down to Eilat and swam in the Red Sea, went to Tel Aviv and partied in the clubs on the beaches, and went to Jerusalem and experienced the Holy Land. And when I saw the ways in which the physical landscape of Israel and Palestine have been transformed by conflict, whether that is the walls that have been erected, the massive highways, the infrastructure to make it possible for expansion of settlement, or it is the actual security infrastructure that surrounds every single community in the region, the entire landscape has been physically transformed by conflict. The second is the way in which the people have been transformed by conflict. As was mentioned, we met with the president, we met with the prime minister, we met with members of parliament in the Knesset, we met with the prime minister of the PLO, we met with scholars, activists, aid workers, and people on the ground, and heard their stories and heard about their trauma and their lives. Whether it was children sharing with us in a UN school about their desire for freedom, whether it was families telling us about the ways in which they traverse the streets constrained by the physical infrastructure and security infrastructure, families who are living within rockets range and constant danger, members of the military who shared with us the trauma of their own service and the things that they felt that they had to conscientiously share post-service. It is a place that has been fundamentally transformed by conflict and violence. And the takeaway that I took from this trip was a sense of urgency and moral responsibility as a nation that has a relationship that is so deep, so cultural, so political, so strategic with both Israel and the Palestinian people. We have a fundamental moral responsibility to ensure that the people of Israel and Palestine can live free, and it is our responsibility as members of Congress to help make that a reality.
So I'm hesitating here because then, talking about now, like, what are the reflections? What do we do go forward? There was this completely horribly painful cut like a knife Onion article. You guys read The Onion, America's finest news source. They had this article that said, Palestinian woman who has recently lost her child finds great comfort when U.S. congressman tells her the situation is very complicated. It's painful, right? And who am I, who are we to say that suddenly we're going to find a way to solve this thing, which, in some measures is much harder now than it would have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't want to sugarcoat what that possibility is, but I do know that any path towards achieving peace, towards achieving a two-state solution, cannot be only responsive to what domestic U.S. interest groups say is necessary. You have to be present. You have to be present on the ground there, have to have the relationships there, the conversations, when you could talk to, leadership of the Palestinian Authority, leadership in the Knesset, and say, okay, what would happen if the U.S. were to take a strong position on the location of an embassy, on Palestinian elections, these things that matter, and understanding how that would affect the dynamics on the ground there, it matters, because it's the only way to preserve some possibility to go forward, to make sure, because as Madeline said, people listen to us, and to make sure that the folks who are listening hear it in the way we intend. I think the best reflection I can leave you is on our last night in Israel as we were leaving, Jeremy asked us all to go around and sort of reflect as we will, and I read one of my favorite quotes from Frederick Douglass, because these things are all tied together. I am one of those who think that the best friend of a nation is he who most faithfully rebukes her for her sins, and he her worst enemy who under the specious and popular garb of patriotism seeks to excuse, palliate, or defend them. And I think that is our challenge, if we are friends of both nations. Thank you so much.
Well, we did have a wonderful trip, and I hope we get to do it again. And really, J Street is masterful. Certainly, J Street wants to educate us, members of Congress, about the situation on the ground and the complexity of it, and sometimes the simplicity of it. What is equality? What is justice? What are equal rights? It's quite simple, that we can boil it down to that. But really, think about what these trips do. They build relationships. They build relationships among us. They build relationships among the people of Israel and Palestine. And that's really part of it. So sometimes when I get overwhelmed, when I see the reorganization under the, looks like future prime minister again, and I'm so gravely concerned about the direction that that will be, and that the direction that that coalition will take Israel and the Palestinian people, I try not to get so overwhelmed, and believe that these relationship building, these learning trips, the sharing of common human experience, what Israel is struggling with is what we are struggling with. We are struggling to make everyone equal. We are struggling to tamp down on anti-Semitism and bigotry and hate. So it's our lot also. It's not just there, it's here as well. It is a global thing. And we can make a difference. So I'll end. You went with Frederick Douglass. Mary, you're not going to be surprised. I talked to Rabbi Seymour today. And Rabbi Seymour is my friend and my rabbi, Rosenblum from the Philadelphia region, Elkins Park. Yes, give it up for Rabbi Seymour. And he told me he could not be with us today. So I said to him, you know what, let's pray together. We prayed by text. I was thinking of our own, one of my favorite prayers in my Catholic Christian faith are the Beatitudes. You know them. It's blessed are this, blessed are that, blessed are that. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Let us be the peacemakers and be the children of God. And so Rabbi Seymour suggested to me a beautiful one. Psalm 122. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love her find peace among themselves. For the sake of my kinfolk and friends, I will speak only of peace. And I would suggest also that we suggest peace for Americans, for Palestinians, for Israelis, respect for all humanity, with dignity, to end bigotry and intolerance, whether it be anti-Semitism, white supremacy, anti-LGBTQ, and other bigotries. Let us pray for peace in Jerusalem.
Amen, Madeline. Amen. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for this wonderful gathering and for giving me the opportunity to come and speak. It has definitely, the J Street trip has definitely changed the way that I do business on the Hill. Now, it's not just on the Hill. I took it with me into my life, into my daily life, and I've used it several times. You know, I think about when I was standing on the Mount of Olives looking out on the sprawling, crowded Jewish cemetery and on the old city of Jerusalem. Now, I didn't know. I mean, I had read about the old city of Jerusalem for many, many years, and I just had no idea that it was so tiny. It's less than a square kilometer. And when you think about it, you have three of the world's primary religions have their most holy sites there. So it's pretty remarkable, and it's pretty amazing that it's all in that tiny little space. And as I would walk around there, I would reflect on the millennia of people who had walked around there, millennia of dawns that had broken there, and the millions of people who had walked around there before me, and tried to take with them some of that wisdom. And so I don't have a rabbi, you know, who's my rabbi. I don't have Frederick Douglass. But I do have a Grandpa Marv. Grandpa Marv said to me, "It's easy to despair for the future, but those who despair do not despair for the future, because I have the will and the faith to change it." Right? And that's how I kind of feel about the situation in Israel and Palestine, because and I will tell you that it has come in very handy, because until you go there and you actually see with your own eyes and you talk with your own ears and listen with your own ears to the people who live there and live it every day, you don't realize the whole issues that are being faced by the people there, and the way that history it permeates every moment of their being. You know, April 15th of this year, you may recall, was actually one of the first night of Passover. It was also one of the Fridays during Ramadan. It was also Good Friday. All three of those big holidays all fell on the same night. And you may also recall that there was a little incident at Al-Aqsa Mosque in the old city in Jerusalem. And I didn't know about that. I had gone to Friday prayers to pay my respects to the folks there at the local mosque. And one of the elders of the mosque came and told me about this incident that had taken place there. He was very concerned that it could turn into something more violent, and that there would be an uprising of some sort. So having been there, I knew exactly where Al-Aqsa is. I know the importance of the region. I know the importance of the area. I knew exactly what was going through everybody's mind with everything. And so I went, and as soon as I got out of there, I got on Haaretz, and I read all the news about it, and I made sure that I said to everybody that I think that hopefully things will be more peaceful and everything. And they were, thankfully, you know. So I think that having that perspective really helps. And for me, when I returned home from the trip, we went with another gentleman, David Price, who was the chairman of the Transportation Subcommittee of Appropriations. Many years he'd been a member of the House of Representatives. Really wonderful guy, and he was one of the people who was so active with Hope Flower School and who was hoping to take us there. That was the school that we were not able to go to on our final day. But I co-led a letter with him, with Chairwoman Lee, and with Joaquin Castro to President Biden, telling him ways that he could do tangible things to make a big difference in the daily lives of the Palestinians by talking to the Israelis about loosening up some things and maybe making a difference in their lives. This isn't something that we did looking for a fanfare or anything. We just did it because we felt very strongly about it, and we thought that was a better way to get the word across, and I'm hoping that the administration will follow through with some of those things. And if they don't, I've got Secretary Blinken coming before my committee soon. You can bet I'll ask him about it. I want to say thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to come and talk to you today, and for this wonderful, wonderful trip. It truly was life-changing. Thank you so much.
So I think I'll leave us also with a story. I had on my final day of our visit a bit of a metaphysical experience myself. In the morning, we started the morning in the Old City, and we went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and visited the Holy Mount and walked, of course, on the holiest of grounds, and heard the stories and came to understand the way in which that space manifests physical conflict. And later in that day, we went to Yad Vashem, which of course is the Holocaust Memorial. And at the very end of it, if any of you have ever visited Yad Vashem, there's a deck overlooking a cypress forest on a hillside. And after I had walked through the museum, I went out there, and there was a breeze rolling in off the hill. And my grandmother, my sister's grandmother, who is Jewish and who was very involved in Israel, had always been a donor for the fund that planted trees in Israel. And as I was standing on that porch, it was like a message from my grandmother had been delivered on the wind from the trees. And I literally had a moment standing there where I realized that I had a moral responsibility to help fight for peace in this place where my family and where so many people have such a personal connection. When I came home to the United States, I was deeply troubled for weeks. I couldn't sleep. I was so disturbed by many of the things that I had seen, troubled by the moral and ethical issues that underpin all of the conflict and challenges that we had seen on the ground. And when I was asked a few months later if I would help to lead a letter to the administration, helping to bring light to evictions that the military was initiating in the West Bank, I knew that that message that had been delivered to me that afternoon at Yad Vashem from my grandmother was a message of action. And so I was proud this summer, in advance of the president's visit to Israel, to lead a letter with 81 members of Congress in both the House and the Senate, asking the Israeli government to not evict these communities in Masafer Yatta and to continue to work for peace. And so, like everyone here, I was deeply impacted by this trip. It was life-changing. It helped me to forge friendships with my colleagues, but also with members of the J Street staff and board that I will cherish and I'm sure are lifelong friendships. But also, I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to reconnect and to be able to stand there and receive that message. So I want to say thank you, and thank you to everyone who makes it possible for us to do our work and to serve you in Congress and to continue to fight the good fight for peace across the planet.
Wow. Thank you so much